Good afternoon, my friends. We are continuing with our going through Light Bearer, the life and legacy of Swami Kriyananda. We're up to the year 1994, having started in 1969. So we're really moving through his life. It's really wonderful. So let's now start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us that we may learn from the example of your life, Swamiji, how to live in this world as a disciple, with devotion, with courage, with determination to live always according to the highest that is within us. We are your children. Guide us and bless us. Om, peace. Amen. Okay, my friends, as usual, we will start with some pictures. We have pictures at the beginning and the end, and also music. Both of the pieces of music that we're choosing today are a little longer than some of the others, but they're really good. Okay, so 1994 was an extremely important year. Swami had open heart surgery. We had a second lawsuit filed. Ananda Palo Alto acquired its church. Those are a few of the highlights. Swami completed the Rubaiyat, the commentary on the Rubaiyat, which was an extraordinarily important thing for him to do personally. He continued to be completely at war with SRF, and Swami's courage in the face of it just went on and on and on. So lots of things to talk about. So let's start with some pictures. As I always explain, these pictures are they're not a scientific collection, just sort of a random collection of various images that give you a feeling for the year. So this first picture is from Ananda Village, and it's some of the girls up there. Most of these children who grew up together have remained friends all their lives. And you can see how much fun they had. That's little baby Abram Gornick over on the side. His sister Kia, his older sister Kia, must be one of the Sunglass Girls. Okay, next picture. This is the girls' softball team at Ananda Village. Bajrang coached the team. What will we do with the white thing was words he put to the take me out to the ball game. That is the same rhythm. And the white thing was the ball. And the children were very unschooled in the rules of softball. So he made up all these joke lyrics. What do you do with the white thing? That you have to catch it, you have to bat it, and so on like that. He was very humorous. And so people always enjoyed, especially the children enjoyed working with him. Next picture. You may remember what we called the Magnificent Seven, which was 7 little babies lined up on the couch. In the course of 1 year, 7 baby boys were born. This is the Magnificent Six. I'm not sure which one of them is missing, but now they're just out of babyhood and they've become toddlers. All right, next picture. This is the school class, Usha Dermond. This is it. Around this time, they really built a beautiful little school complex of classrooms on a certain hill in the village. And the schools really coalesced around that, in those buildings, around very competent and creative teachers. Next picture. This was a family service. It was difficult to include the children in Ananda services because the vibration of our services is very still and very meditative. Children could be there for the music, sometimes they were a little older for the talks, but it was hard to have their energy in there when we were trying to be really still. So we started a family ministry and family services where the parents could come with their children and the children's behavior wouldn't be at all disruptive. So they often met at the Crystal Hermitage, the living room of Swamiji's house. So Durga and Vidura are just leading the children's service. Next picture. More classes. Usha with her, let's see, I don't know what grade she is, 4th and 5th grade. Yeah. Next picture. And Karen with her kindergarten class. These were all children who lived in our community. At that time at the village, we had a very high children population. Next picture. And again, this is the middle school, 7th and 8th graders. It's amazing to just see what an experience it is to be a human being and just have your body just keep growing. You start very small, and it feels of you who remember, and then you just suddenly, grow into this adult-sized body. It's very critically important how children are raised and what they are taught. Education for life, which is the system that Master created, that Swamiji further developed. He said it is perhaps the most important thing Ananda is doing, even though we think in terms of Kriya and so on. But if we can educate children in a different way, less materialistic, more inwardly directed, aware of their relationship to a greater reality, that will really change the world. Next picture. This is the award ceremony at the end of every school year for a long time. I think even now, every child is given a quality. It's like something that they have developed or outstanding in. And so we celebrate some aspect of their inner development, not just you were the best math student, you were the best soccer player, you were the best actress. It's more like I'm celebrated for the quality of enthusiasm or for my honest introspection or my artistic integrity, just some quality that is unrelated to age, but really has to do with developing character. And the children who have been with Ananda all through their schooling, many of them remember all the qualities that they were given. And as they grow older, those qualities continue to be a guiding reality in their self-understanding and their relationship to the world. I don't know if it was Nitai, who was the founding teacher of all of our schools, or who came up with the idea, but it's been a brilliant contribution to the education of the children. Next picture. This is the kindergarten class. Maybe I think they look about 1st grade, maybe 2nd grade, having lunch outside the school office at the school complex. Next picture. This setup in the dining room of the expanding light, big backdrop, and this is one of the children's plays. Theater has always played a great role. Theater and music. It's in keeping with Swamiji's way of working with us as adults, which is creative artistic self-expression is a tremendous way for a person to develop. And for when children learn to be able to stand in front of other people and speak, to be able to be flexible enough in themselves to be able to take on roles. And when you have stories, which we do here in Palo Alto, where the stories are all about saints and noble people, and the children get to really live through, not just merely hear about it, but actually live through the adventures of these great lives. The learning and the understanding goes very, very deep. Next picture. This again is music. The woman on the right, Cassandra, was a Suzuki violin teacher, and David Eby, who's not in the picture, was a professional cellist, is a professional cellist. So we have a whole generation of children who grew up playing either violin or cello. And then Jack Wallace would teach piano. So through this period of time, we had youth orchestras right in our own small community. It was extremely impressive. Next picture. Just more children's celebration at the end of school. Next. I don't know what this was. It looks to me like Christmas caroling. Like this little group of children came into the market where people would be having a cup of coffee or shopping and probably sang a song. That's the impression I have from looking at it. They're all dressed in red, so it's probably Christmas time. Next picture. And this was the children's choir. And of course, there were lots of musicians within Ananda as adults because Swami was a musician and like attracts like. So that's Tim Kretzmann playing the dulcimer, and probably his daughter Krishnabai playing the violin. Next picture. Rick Morehouse is a blacksmith, has a blacksmith shop. He grew up in Louisiana. He might have learned from his father, I'm not sure, but he was an old-fashioned blacksmith and did, decorative ironwork. And I'm not sure why the child is dressed like that, but in any case, she came in to be his assistant on one of these days. Maybe they were playing pioneers, or maybe that's just how she liked to dress. Next picture. And this, I don't know, for some reason, this is my favorite. These 4 little girls, I don't know whether they're dressed as pieces of fruit or what they're supposed to be, but whatever it is, they're just the 4 of them lined up there like that. Maybe they're the fairies, the devas that take care of those fruits, but it's just a classic child picture. All right, next. And this is in Palo Alto. This is our Dr. Marcel and Connie, Dr. Connie and Dr. Marcel Hernandez and their son, Gabriel. Gabriel was 5 or 6 years old at this point. This was Krishna's birthday. And so he was dressed up as baby Gopal, which is why he has all the blue paint on his skin. Okay, next picture. This was a concert in Crystal Hermitage for Swamiji. There's a room up above where you can take this photograph. And you see Swami sitting in the middle, harp, violin, cello, presentation of his music, probably for some special occasion. Next picture. This was a dramatic performance put on by the adults, and it was a dramatization of the Mahabharata. And this is Shakuni throwing the dice to trick Yudhishthira. Anyway, it's marvelous. Next picture. You can see the costumes are also, next picture. The costumes are also Maggie, Mary Weber, has this passion for costume, and over the years she's built up an extraordinary costume house, really. And all these costumes were her doing from her treasure house there. Next picture. This is Easter. Karen Gamow dressed up like the Easter bunny. She's a nearsighted Easter bunny. She has her glasses on over her white face. Next picture. And next. This is what used to be, first was the publications building, then became Hansa Temple. It's probably being converted into a temple. I'm not quite sure. This is a Rajasi Day with a couple of men working on it. Next picture. And Hari Das and Gary McSweeney also up on the scaffold. I think they painted it white. I don't think they weren't building it. They were just refurbishing it to make it into a temple. Next picture. At the Ananda Village, and actually occasionally here, but only once or twice, this was a county open house, invited everyone in Nevada County to just come and see Ananda and learn about Ananda. So it's like open to the public, come, and we would have food and educational things and lots of music. Always very successful and very helpful to integrate our lives with the lives of the whole county. Next picture. This was Jeannie's wedding day, Seva on the right as you face it, Arti on the other side, just celebrating with her. Next picture. Jeannie married Tim Shantz, and that little girl, I think it's Rose Bazan. No, it's I think it might be Rose. Anyway, it was one of the Bazan children, and that was their wedding picture. Beautiful. Next. And this is the omnipresent living flag. Every year, I have a 4th of July picture with different people dressed in that costume to be part of the parade, to be the living flag. They always look like they're having so much fun, just walking. It's so cheerful and silly and also just lovely all at the same time. So I always enjoy looking at it. Okay, next picture. Ben Skillman, excuse me. Isn't that funny? I can't remember his first name. The little boy is Ben, and that's his father. Who, this is my age. I know him very, very well. His first name escapes me right at this moment. I know him perfectly well. It'll come to me in just a moment. Anyway, That's his son, father and son. 4th of July float. Next picture. This is again Ben Skillman and Kashi Betts. They were two of the Magnificent Seven. 4th of July. Next picture. Lisa Powers, Indra Devi now, she was coordinated the Ananda pilgrimages. So she's dressing like Lakshmi there. She has gold coins in her one hand and a lotus in the other. And she was, for the parade, she was representing the pilgrimage tours dressed in that way. Next picture. And this is Durga and Vidur. They were more or less the mayor and his wife. They were very key people in running the whole village enterprise. And Rose Blake and anyway, whoever the Hashi's child is in there. Next picture. This looks so much, doesn't he look like a small town politician? I just love this picture. This is Vidura also surveying his realm, I guess. Next picture. When after they built the shrine of the masters, which is right near the chapel, right above the chapel at the Crystal Hermitage Gardens. And this was the day they dedicated that shrine. So I don't know what the ceremony was, but apparently they went all through the grounds, ascending the master's blessings. Next picture. Same event. People coming together to chant, send blessings through the whole land. Next picture. This was Spiritual Renewal Week of 1994, and we had an Indian banquet and served Indian style, which everyone just sitting on the ground with food down the long sheets of cloth or of paper down the middle. Very, very festive. Next. Same picture with the beginning of the food being served on top of it. Next picture. Christmas time, living creche. This was different people. We followed the same tradition here and have for many years in different forms, one or another, where people act out the story of the birth of Jesus, take on the roles. Next picture. Oh, beautiful. Kirtan at Crystal Hermitage for some occasion, unknown why, but just one doesn't need an excuse to come together and sing. Next picture. More kirtan outside. Dharmadas and Nirmala, Leela and David Hogendijk. My friends and I were commenting how many times we look at these pictures now, how many people have finished their incarnations and have passed on to the astral world. Both David and Leela on the left are now in the astral world and have been for some time. Next picture. And in 1994, Ananda Palo Alto acquired our permanent home, this temple. It was St. Aloysius Catholic Church. And this is what it looked like in 1994 when we began to negotiate to buy it. Next picture. This was the inside when we bought it. They had 6 or 7 windows, and each one represented one of the Catholic sacraments. You can see Mother Mary in the niche up there. The Catholics didn't want to leave the center portion, which actually, of the stained glass, which actually depicts their sacraments. So they removed that and replaced it with clear glass, but left the pattern on the outside, which interesting is blue, white, and gold. And at the top of the outside pattern, there's a dove. The dove is often the Christian symbol, but it's also, the dove is also the 5 points. You had the 2 points of the tail, the 2 points of the wing, and the top of the head. So it also is the same symbol as the 5-pointed star that you see in the spiritual eye. So that particular design, of all the designs they could have chosen, is also exactly appropriate for us. So they took the center out, brought in clear glass, which was much better because it let the light in. But the outside design is still the same. Next picture. This is what it looked like when we first came in. We have reconfigured it. We have reconfigured it since this time, but this is literally the day that we saw it for the first time. Next picture. And this is us standing in it. Linda Gerber in the beige dress, Santoshi in the middle, and I'm in the blue on the side there. Um, we we met with the realtor. We learned about it somehow, sort of very quickly, that it was for sale. For 7 years, we'd been looking for a building, and we had heard that the Catholics wanted to sell some of their buildings in Palo Alto because they had 7 parishes and they couldn't support them all. The reason for that is because they don't have enough priests, but they don't like to say that. So this came on the market, and the man selling it was doing it as a favor to the church. He was a member of the church, and the realtor that we had on our side was his friend. And so it just sort of happened that it just came to us. There was no competition for it. They gave us a very good price. It's very interesting because for years we'd been looking for a building, and we'd shown Swami several properties. Nothing had worked. When we started negotiating this one, Swamiji said, "Oh yes, I always thought that would be our home." And conveniently, it was like it's like about 4 blocks from the storefront that we'd been in all the time before. So there was just very little geographic disruption, which is important if people are used to coming. And we didn't have much money. We'd been saving money, but we didn't really have the money. They sold it to us for something like $1.3 million or $1.4 million. It was a very good deal. And it was the whole corner property plus an old house, which was attached to it, which is now where we have built our new school building. And a lot of the Catholics were upset that it was going to a group like us. And it was very funny. There was a chiropractor also over on California Avenue, and I used to go to him regularly. And it turned out that the key people in the Catholic Church who were selling it were going to the chiropractor too. And they were under stress because they were losing their church, and we were under stress because we were buying their church. And the same chiropractor was trying to keep us all afloat. And when we had this first meeting with the realtor, we had a few people with us, and they were all people who had really good jobs and really good status positions in Silicon Valley, so that we would just appear that we were competent and capable of buying this, because we didn't have that much money behind us, but we just knew that we could. So next picture. This is just what it looked like. This was the outside what is now the teaching center. Next. This is where the kindergarten class is now, and the school offices are up above. This was actually the housing for the priests. I can't remember what they call that word, but that's where they all lived. They don't call it a parsonage. There's another word, but that's where they lived. Next picture. And this is the patio, which is now has all the beautiful furniture. You can't quite see it here. There's these iron walls. There's also these walls made out of the kinds of bricks that have holes in them. We called it the archery wall because it was the kind of wall you could, stand behind and shoot your arrows through the hole in the bricks. So there was an archery wall, as we called it in this. It was all had tremendous potential, and it was just a little neglected. That's just what happens. Next picture. This is the tree, the same tree that was there forever, is still there. We built the patio. We refurbished the patio around it. Next picture. Soon after we moved in, we put up what was really a temporary altar, which you can see was just a big blue cloth hanging from a rod, and we put the pictures of the master. And suddenly, this was the biggest venue that Ananda owned in the United States at this point. The Seattle temple hadn't been built yet, nor had the Assisi temple been built. So everybody came together from the many parts of from the US, and we had an oratorio concert there that year. I'm pretty sure this was the first year. Might have been a year after, but it was before we did anything to change the temple, except we just took down the cross and put up the pictures of the masters. When I was there with my friend Allie McKeon, and we hung the pictures of the masters, and there was this scaffolding. She was helping. She had a very fine sense of design, and we just figured out how to do something very simple and very temporary. We had this huge blue curtain, which I sewed on my sewing machine. It was just massive, and we hung it up on the rod, and then we put little holes in so we could hang the pictures through it. We were working on it. It was probably a Saturday night. I feel like that was. And we worked on it really late. So by the time we were done, it was like 11 o'clock at night. And we'd finally gotten it all hung. We must have moved the scaffolding away. We had some men with us to help. We moved the scaffolding away. And I turned my back to it and I walked the length of the sanctuary, which is quite a distance, relatively speaking, without looking at it. And then from the front door, I turned around to just see what the impact was going to be, because now we had converted this Catholic church into a church dedicated to our gurus. And I remember, and it was a vivid superconscious experience. I stood there and I felt, Master uses the phrase an astral wind. I felt it twice in my life, and this was the first time. And really, it felt exactly as if there was this huge rush of wind going over my head, except, of course, there was no physical movement. And I felt it was the masters, now that they'd been installed, rushing out to sort of fill the whole countryside around our church with their vibrations. It was, as you can imagine, absolutely thrilling. The only other time I felt that was when Paula died. In the instant that she left her body, I felt that same wind. And then it felt like a host of angels going over my head. So Swamiji is taking his bows at the end of the concert there. All right, next picture. I don't know again if this is actually 94, but this was a rehearsal for a musical event where Swami was present, and he was just there with everyone enjoying the rehearsal. I sort of wanted just to put pictures in to help you appreciate that Swami just moved through our lives in a very informal way, even though there were occasions when it was, magnificently staged. But the rest of the time, he just was with us like a very simple, wonderful friend. Next picture. After we opened the church, and this is, if not from 94, it's really close to it, Swamiji came and gave service. This is the light bearer standing behind him. Ramurti, Sita, Raghu, Gary, David, me, somebody who doesn't show, I think off to the side there. What next picture? And this is the last picture in this series. This was Swamiji. Swamiji came and went from our community very often during these years because of many reasons, but including the fact that we were engaged in litigation all the time. And the Ananda legal office was in our community. Naidruva, one of our lawyers, was here. Keshava as a paralegal. Ram Bhakta worked on it. We actually devoted an apartment, turned it into the office. And John Parsons was also in Palo Alto, so he was often here. And many times when we knew he was coming or departing, we would pass the word and the community came out to greet him. So during this period, this year actually, Swami also wrote several instrumental pieces, like orchestral pieces, in a style that he hadn't really done that much before. And one of them was called Life is a Quest for Joy. And so while this picture shows we're going to enjoy Life is a Quest for Joy, it's a little bit longer than some of the songs. So perhaps just settle in to enjoy it now. Swamiji wrote that piece, Life is a Quest for Joy, as the soundtrack for a slideshow he'd made, which was called Different Worlds, which was photographs, lots of photographs of different people. It was all faces, people all over the world of all ages, many different nationalities. And then a lot of pictures of people who were devotees, whose lives were devoted to God, just perceiving the many different consciousnesses that people have. And he wanted a melody that essentially embraced the whole human condition, the joy, the sorrow, the aspiration, the disappointment. And he felt that piece of music was given to him to just help us to feel in a musical way what that was. As I sit here reflecting on it, I find it interesting because he wrote that, he orchestrated that melody at this time. And what happened to us in 1994, I know a lot of this ends up being stories about the litigation that we went through. And it wasn't by any means the only thing that happened. I mean, as I said, this is the same year that here in Palo Alto, we acquired our church, which was, the line in the sand for the work that we're doing. But what happened also in 1994, let me just start from the very beginning. But we were in litigation. Self-Realization Fellowship was suing us from July of 1990 until 2002. 12 years, one Jupiter cycle, if you're thinking astrologically. But what actually happened is that by the beginning of 1994, all the major issues had been decided. Self-realization was generic. They couldn't trademark Master's name. They couldn't own Master's name, image, and likeness because he was just the founder of the organization. They couldn't. They lost the copyrights to Master's original writing, which included our publishing of Autobiography of a Yogi, the original edition in 1993. I talked about all of that. What happened for the next, like whatever it was, 10 years, 8 years, is that they kept filing appeals, reconsideration, and then went through the state court and even tried to go to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it. So it just sort of went on and on and on. And in the very end, as you'll hear when we get there, a small one small aspect of the case was remanded back, and we ended up in 2002 actually having a trial on a small issue, small compared to, small in the sense of its impact on our ability to continue to serve Master. By this point in 1994, basically our future was secure. Everything else was just extra. The one issue that was still remaining was SRF had accused us of, quote, passing off. I learned all these legal terms, passing off. We'd passed ourselves off as being representatives of Yogananda's teaching, and they claimed that that was a fraudulent thing for us to do. It gradually came out in an exchange of correspondence which Swami had with Dayamata in 1994, was that what they were actually accusing us of doing was passing ourselves off as being a legitimate expression of Master's teaching, not passing ourselves off as being SRF, which is how they actually had to word it for the legal case, which is that we were trying to trade on their good name by passing ourselves off as being affiliated with them, which we never did. In fact, we worked very hard to distance ourselves. In fact, we put a disclaimer on all of our material. Ananda is not affiliated with Self-Realization Fellowship. Swamiji said, the way you would naturally read that would be that it was to our detriment to be affiliated with them. So we didn't want to be mistaken for being affiliated with them. But anyway, that's what they wanted us to do. So we did it. But they were really upset because we existed. So at the beginning of January of 1994, Swami Kriyananda asked our lawyer, John Parsons, he said, they've lost all the major issues. I mean, they can continue to appeal them, but Judge Garcia was so excellent and so careful in the way he wrote his opinions and the way he conducted his courtroom that he did not leave much room for them to find any way to get it appealed, get it reversed or remanded. So Swami said to John, you know, they've lost all the major issues 3 years into this. What can they do now? Do they have any recourse left? And John said, yes, there's one, which is, it's a legal concept called tarnishment, which is if it could be proved that Ananda and Swami Kriyananda were morally reprehensible, and any association in the minds of the public between the reprehensible behavior of Ananda and the good name of Self-Realization Fellowship would tarnish SRF's reputation. On that basis, they might be able to get the court to protect them from that tarnishment by restoring some exclusive rights to them. So Swami said, quite simply, get ready, you know. And he talked about it. He wrote to us at the beginning of the year, and he talked about the fact that what SRF had done with that lawsuit, and it was skillfully done. You know, it was a clever legal strategy. It wasn't an honest strategy, but it was clever. Which was what was fundamentally a theological dispute, which is SRF claimed absolute authority over Master's work. Swami said, as a direct disciple, I have the right to represent my guru. That was the essence of it. But intellectual property, trademark, copyright, publicity rights, as I explained in 1990 class, all of that was the veneer over it. But it was really a theological dispute. So Swamiji said, so when everything else fails in religious disputes between religious organizations, they try to persecute you. It ceases to be an impersonal matter of dogma or of law, and it becomes a profound and deep attempt to discredit. And interestingly, and this is all part of the fantastically fascinating cosmic drama of which we are all a part, in which this was a huge chapter, every ashram in America, every significant guru in America was being attacked during these same years in the same way. Abuse of power, abuse of finances, abuse of women, or in some cases, abuse of men, but sexual issues, just straight across the board. And by the end of that decade, every ashram had been, in some cases, destroyed. And almost all of the spiritual teachers were gone. They had either gone to India, didn't come back, gone to India and died, gone into seclusion and didn't come out. Ananda was actually the only one that was left standing, and more or less, as we'll see, just strengthened rather than weakened. The difference being the difficulties in the other ashrams, the antagonist tended to be someone inside the ashram, where we were assaulted from the outside. And even though during those years, many people departed and many people became disenchanted, the core of our spiritual community did not waver. And so the core leadership was not split. We were strong. And Swamiji said much later that he was the only one of the only ones, or perhaps the only one, who just stood and fought. And he said he was taking it for the whole yoga community, because there was this shadow force that was just trying to pull down all of these spiritual works in this country. So it wasn't until the end of the year, but it was Thanksgiving, the very end of November of 1994. And very interestingly, we always have a Thanksgiving celebration here in Palo Alto, and I usually stay for it naturally. But somehow I just woke up in the morning. It wasn't Thanksgiving Day, but it was that Thanksgiving time. I just woke up in the morning and felt I need to go to Ananda Village for Thanksgiving, which it never occurred to me to do that. So I did. I just got in the car and went by myself up there. And during the days I was there, Swami Kriyananda was served with a new lawsuit. And the new lawsuit had emanated from an individual person, Bertolucci was her last name. She filed a lawsuit claiming that Ananda was an abusive cult. Sexual abuse, financial abuse, abuse of power, everything that you can think of. It was literally a boilerplate lawsuit that her attorney had filed against several other cults. This was his particular passion. And she had, we all knew this woman. She had been part of Ananda for a number of years. She had had a consensual affair with a married man in the community. And that man was not only a husband, but he was a father of a child with special needs. And she enticed him into having an affair with her. And after a few months, he repudiated that and resolved to stay with his family, at which point Swami Kriyananda, who had heard about it, stepped in and said, you have to support him. You have to, and therefore you need to leave Ananda Village. He wanted her to go live in our community in Europe, or at least go up to the farthest one from Ananda Village, which was Seattle. But she was from Palo Alto, and she insisted on coming back here. And we took her in. These, in a close-knit community like ours, something like this was not unheard of. And, we were very compassionate, try to help everybody through this and put everybody back on the path of Dharma. But after a short period of time, she aligned herself. She met some very ex-Ananda members who were very hateful toward us and who had strong contacts with SRF, etc. So when this lawsuit is put into Swami's hands, and it's really a lawsuit against her former lover, that's the one she was trying to really get. But because he was an ordained minister, it was also against the whole organization. The whole church should have protected her. Now, I understand, especially these days, but also even then, there's a very strong energy around all of these things. And also included in this were several declarations from 12 to 30 years prior, when Swamiji himself had been involved with several different women, not ever anything long-term or more than, what would you say, a temporary alliance. But that was also included. And that was included in the most lurid possible detail. These things are not written by the individuals, they're written by the lawyers. The purpose of that was, when you file a lawsuit, if you file an allegation under oath, it's exempt from the libel laws. And therefore, all of that can be published without any jeopardy, no matter whether it's true or false. And even if later it's proven to be a complete fabrication, the enforcement system against that is profoundly difficult. Let's just put it that way. And of course, if you're a spiritual organization, all it takes is just some ugly accusations and you can sink the ship. So we were off and running with this one. And we made several errors, and this will unfold as this took 4 years to run its course. We ended up with an attorney. We ended up with the wrong attorney, an attorney who didn't listen to us and didn't know how to defend us. And the second was more subtle, and it was very interesting. All the charges were so preposterous. You know, that Ananda women were second-class citizens and lived in a state of oppression, and that all of us were mistreated slaves of Swami Kriyananda, and that actually there was an actual accusation that Ananda itself was a sham organization set up entirely to create a harem for Swami Kriyananda and his close-in minions. And that was actually in the papers. I'm not exaggerating. So it wasn't a question of whether Swamiji, who had been a monk since 1948, and except from 1982 until actually even when the suit was filed, he was no longer a monk. He had married. There'd been 2 public relationships. He hadn't resumed his sannyas vows at that point. He was married. He wore a wedding ring. Everyone knew he had a wife. His title had been changed from Swami to Sri to accommodate that. He always dressed in white or lavender. He stopped wearing orange. But she still claimed that he had committed fraud by presenting himself as a celibate monk when he wasn't. I mean, it was ludicrous. Except we still called him Swami. And that was a conscious decision that we all made, because Swami also means teacher. Usually a Swami is a monk, but Swami also means teacher. And we had community discussion. We all decided whether he's married or a monastic, he's still our teacher, so we'll still call him Swami. But she pointed to that. So, I mean, and we just thought, oh, this will be so easy to take down. This is just too ludicrous. But it wasn't. We profoundly and grossly underestimated the kinds of things that could happen, and did, as we'll talk about as we go on. But let me just finish the thought here. It became very confused as to what Swami Kriyananda was actually accused of. And so he began to be accused of sexual perversion of every way that you can possibly imagine, and coercion and all of these things, just because once the publicity starts running, the publicity starts running. And it was a very interesting time for all of us. So it started right in 1994, which was I'm trying to think about it. There's lots more that can be said, and I will say about it. I want to give you what it felt like, because that was the most interesting part. You know, one of the differences between the Ananda village, Ananda as an entity, and most of the other ashrams, American ashrams, most of whom were led by Indian swamis, which is we lived a very natural lifestyle. That's the only way I can put it. Swamiji did not impose celibacy on it. He did not impose celibacy on married couples. It just, a person's sexual life was their own life. It wasn't a community issue. And, I mentioned occasionally undharmic alliances would come about, marriages would break up, people would be attracted to someone else, things would happen. It was by no means a hotbed of licentiousness as we were presented. But in the course of life, especially when, as Swami said, we're a very old spiritual family and we have deep ties with one another, people would need to find adjustments. In this society, this is what they do. But it was always a personal, private matter. One of the difficulties that happened in some of the other ashrams was that celibacy had been imposed upon the ashram, even for married couples. So if it came out that the teacher who had imposed it was himself not following the same guidelines, there was a natural response that was very intense. At Ananda, what we all said to each other, has Swami ever, demanded anything of us that we ourselves didn't volunteer to give? Did he ever, impose his authority? It was just, anyway. And his private life was his private life as well as ours. And it was all in the past. And in 1981, he stopped being a Swami. So for like almost 15 years at that point. But nonetheless, that didn't make any difference because when Swami received those papers, it was addressed against the woman's former lover. Swami just looked at the papers. He said, this has nothing to do with him. This is SRF trying to get to me. And over time, by the time we finished, we had traced the money. We followed the money, and the money went right back to them. So it was very unpleasant. But what it was, and this is what I was wanting to say, even the dispute up into that time about who owned Master's works, who owned his name, it was unpleasant, but it wasn't personal in the same way. This was all of a sudden, this was really ugly. This was really mean-spirited. This was really dishonest. This was really a very direct attempt to tear us to pieces. I would call it a rite of passage. It was just a rite of passage where we all had to really understand what we'd gotten ourselves into. It's one thing to be like, just kind of be the darlings of the spiritual community and be doing this happy thing in this beautiful place. It's quite another to be told that you're the victim of fraud, you're being taken advantage of, you're involved with evil. And it was shouted at us because the same day we were served with the lawsuit, it was delivered to the newspapers in every area where Ananda existed. So we had to grow up. We had to find out, what do I believe and why do I believe it? And that's pretty much the stance that I took with people. I kept to everyone from the beginning. We had no choice. Some of the other Ananda communities took a different stance, but the case was filed in the court, which is a few miles from here, and it was in the front page of the paper every day. So, we just said, this is what's happening. What do you think? And that was basically our defense. Here's the information, here's the allegations. I'll answer any question you ask, but I'm not going to fight you on this. It's like, if your own experience cannot tell you what the truth is and what the goodness is of what you're involved in, I'm not going to be able to make that different for you. So this was the beginning of a really, really ugly period for us. And of course, and coinciding with this, Swamiji had gotten this. See, this is how life is so odd. The very same year, we got our church in September, and this case came down in November. So 2 months later. So we're rising up on this incredible wave of success and happiness and joy with what we're doing. And then this thing comes just a couple of months later. So we're riding like this. Swami Kriyananda had been put under contract with Time Warner Books, which is one of the biggest publishers in the country. And the president of that company was convinced that Swamiji was going to be, he could make him a national sensation. Swamiji said to him, he said, I'm the kind of author who's not popular till he's dead. And what Swami meant by that was that he was ahead of his time and that he was not in tune with the present. He was writing for the future. But this man, whose name I can't remember, but he was a really nice man, he said, no, I'm going to make an effort to do this. And he took all of Swami's secrets books and he put them into one wonderful volume called Secrets of Life. And he published it with a lot of fanfare. And he sent Swami out on an 11-city tour, national tour, to promote this book. Turned out Swami was right. It never really took off. This man thought that Swami would be the next sort of like, celebrity guru, but it didn't turn out that way. But what also happened during that time is Swami's heart condition began to deteriorate more and more. And by the time he finished that tour, he was his heart was behaving very badly. And so he set up for the beginning of December that he would go into the hospital and they were going to put a pacemaker in. This lawsuit comes to us right at the end of November. A couple of weeks later, he goes into the hospital. They discover that a pacemaker is not going to do it because he has a valve that's misfunctioning and some of the main arteries were clogged up. So instead of just the simple insertion of a pacemaker, Swami has major open heart surgery. So first comes this litigation, and this long tour in which he's supposedly going to become very popular. Then he has heart surgery, and then all this negative publicity starts striking. So it was a memorable year. And during that same year, Swami finished and published the Rubaiyat, the edited commentary of Master on what is really a great mystical scripture. Swami was so deeply moved at having the opportunity to do this because this was an assignment he was given before he was 25 years old. And he had never been able to do it because he never had access, he never had legal right to the material. But the litigation, SRF filing, you see, this was the irony. Everyone assumed that SRF actually owned the rights to everything. And because they tried to extend their power even further, they in fact lost everything. So Swami took the opportunity, and that year and the year before, he wrote his commentary to the Rubaiyat, and he said, if Master had done nothing else except interpret the scripture, he said he would still qualify as one of the greatest spiritual teachers of all time. Just this book. And Swami said, of all the work I've done, this is the most important work. And then we, meaning here in our area, were privileged that Swamiji wanted to make an audio book of this. And last week you heard him singing the quatrains. He wrote this melody for the quatrains, and he wanted to make an audio book, which he did, which exists, an audio book of him singing the verses and then with musical background, reciting the poetic interpretation and then reading the more expanded commentary for the 75 or so quatrains. They had a recording studio up right at Crystal Hermitage, but it wasn't sophisticated enough for what Swamiji had in mind. So they rented a recording studio and a qualified engineer right near our community, right near here. It was the closest and the most convenient place. We always had a dedicated, we had a dedicated apartment for Swamiji. It was connected to the apartment where I lived, but it was 2 rooms and his own private bath upstairs, all to himself. So it was very comfortable. He could come here and be very comfortable in our dwelling because it was really his house. He didn't have to displace us. I could cook for him. We could just make it all work. So he rented the studio, and then he came in and recorded the audiobook. Because renting the studio was expensive, he pressed hard to do it. So for like 2.5 days, he just stood at the microphone and did this. And it was just so beautiful. And then he came to the very end of it. I write about this in the book. The last verses of the Rubaiyat are so beautiful too. And after 2.5 days, and many times during this is now before his heart operation. So he's still struggling with that. So he came to the last verses, which many of you know. Ah, moon of my delight, who knows no wane. The moon of heaven is rising once again. How oft hereafter rising shall she look through this same garden after me in vain. So Swami starts singing and starts saying that, and you can hear he's beginning to choke up inside. And then he finally gets to, and when thyself with shining feet shall pass among the guests, stars scattered on the grass, and in thy joyous errand reach the spot where I made one, turn down an empty glass. And when Swami got to there, he completely just could not control his emotion anymore. Swami was not in the habit at that time of expressing how he felt. He began to sob. He began to sob like a child. He just was totally overcome. All that he had been through since he was a young man with Master, all the trials and tribulations and physical and mental and spiritual experiences, including now, just the litigation against him, all of this. And he couldn't stop crying. And we all it's on record somewhere because the tape kept running the whole time. And he finally managed to get the words out that it was just so beautiful and that he felt so privileged to have been able to be a part of it. And then he sort of tried to pull himself together and he read, but you could just hear all the background of tears behind it. So he did it all. And then he says to us, sort of looks at us and he said, do you think that I should do it over again? And we all just nodded. Yes, I think you have to do the whole thing again. And so he pulled himself together and he did. But oh my, so many moments of divine breakthrough is the only thing I can say, where the veil just parts and the cosmic power just really comes through. So my friends, let's look at the pictures that we have for the rest of this year and listen to the music. So the Skillmans, father and son again. Peter Skillman, thank you. It was offered to me. I knew it would come back. This is an age-related thing. Overall, my mind is sharper than it's ever been, but I still lose proper nouns. It's just, it must be some little particular neuron that isn't as geriatrically sound as all the rest. Peter Skillman, whom I know quite well, and his beautiful son, Ben. Next picture. There were a lot of like very formal portraits taken this year. So we have beautiful pictures. This is Catherine Kairavi. Wonderful. She did fundraising for many years, now works with the guest programs and with the Ananda training program, your first year of life there. Next picture, at Ananda Village, beautiful of Devi. So we'll just go through these one at a time. This is Dr. Peter talking to Ben Skillman. I don't know, it's just, sometimes a photograph captures such a beautiful feeling. Dr. Peter, of course, is one of the kindest, most compassionate people in the world. And he's a doctor, and so therefore he also works with children. It's just such a dear picture. I love it. And look at Ben's little face sort of looking at the doctor. You can sort of, Dr. Peter's obviously saying something that Ben is quite interested in. Next picture. Haridas and Roma and their darling little girl, Rose. This all of these pictures to me come in they're all very more poignant than some, because this was such an interesting time, and we were under such siege that the alliance we had with each other and the understanding we had with each other of what was really going on here, that there was a force that was trying to break our spirit. No, I forgot to mention something very important. As soon as that lawsuit was filed against Swami, he wrote a paper which was called Guru, Celibacy, and Spiritual Authority. And he talked about the completely immature and unreasonable projection that so many Americans especially had upon spiritual teachers. He said, they're not perfect. We're not perfect. He said, but we still have a lot to offer. He even said more strongly, in that paper that you think you want the spiritual perfection, but that's not really what will be helpful to you. What will be helpful to you is examples of people who are more advanced than you are, but are still in relationship to the life you're living. And Swami wasn't, there were many things that Swami said, which I'll add in later, but later meaning later sessions. But all of that just made, and even the life as a quest for joy, and the song we're going to hear at the end, which was Life Mantra, which was a real expression in music of the heartfelt sincerity with which we were all striving to realize God and to live a good life and to take care of each other. So everything about these years, combined with the exhilaration in my personal life of the way this colony was developing with the arrival of the temple into our lives. So even just when I look at very ordinary things, I feel very emotional watching them because I knew everything that was happening. So here's Roma and Haridas and their darling Rose. Next picture. Haridas and Roma again with Hridaya in the center. Hridaya was the leader of our school for many years. She just retired. She was brought in because, among other reasons, because she was such a loving and harmonious person that she was able to just pull all the different energies together and has done an exquisite job for all these years. Next picture. This is a picture of John Parsons, who was our attorney, still is for many aspects of Ananda, and Naidruva, an Ananda member who was also qualified. She was actually a Harvard Law graduate. She was the first Black woman, I believe, to attend and graduate from Harvard Law School. She was also in a class which was a group of the first women, or the first significant group of women. There's actually one of those women who wrote a book about it, and she was the first Black woman to do it. And she felt sent by God. She wasn't on the spiritual path. She wasn't on this path at that point, but she just felt God told her that she was supposed to be a lawyer and she was supposed to go to Harvard. So she did. And when she years later, she was no longer practicing law, but she went back into it. And for the 12 years of this, she basically was the key to saving Ananda. So it's just like, we never know what the drama of our life is. And she and John, of course, became very good friends, and all of us with John. Okay, next picture. Jaya, magnificent eyes of Jaya. Next picture. Jeannie and Tim Shantz again. Such lovely faces. Next. Lewis Howard. Huh. Lewis was a very good actor, very good comedian too. He could do a lot with those eyebrows. Next picture. Leela. She was the lovely lady who, she helped start the center in Italy, and she lived in a number of different communities. She actually started way back in the San Francisco house in the late 70s. And eventually she became Swami's cook. And to a certain extent, she's just a personal assistant, but primarily she cooked for him. She cooked. She was so high-minded. She actually cooked for Swami without ever tasting the food. For a very interesting principle, she felt it was for him and not for her. And even when there was food left over, she would give the leftovers away to other people, but she would never eat it for herself. So she was always just cooking for him. And I think I mentioned before, she, on her birthday, in 2012, actually, she cooked dinner for him for the last time. The next day she went to the doctor and was told that she was riddled with cancer. She stopped cooking. She lay down, and 5 or 6 weeks later, she had passed. And she was a real angel. Next picture. Nalini. Nalini, as a very personal thing, Nalini and I visited Ananda Village for the first time in August of 1970 on the same day. So we both arrived there on the same day. And she was my first Ananda friend. We've remained friends ever since. And it was the first time I had that experience of meeting a friend from past lives. I had it consciously. It's like we just knew each other immediately. And we're sisters just from the first moment and to this day remain so. Next picture. This is Netri. She also is a well-known cook. She actually is a woman of innumerable talents. She and her husband are responsible for the Crystal Hermitage Gardens. What you see in those gardens is the result of years of work by her and her husband, Jivada. Next picture. This is Nishala. She and her husband, Nakula, have started the Ananda College. Nishala is also a very gifted writer and has written several books. Next picture. This is the Ananda Sangha staff in 1994, just having a party for some reason, who knows? You see Jyotish and Devi and many of the others there. Next picture. Vidura, Hanuman, and Krishnadas up in Portland, Oregon. Next picture. Purushottama, also Joseph Selby. Joseph has written several really fine books under the name Joseph Selby. The book on the Yugas, he's co-author with that. He's also written a book called Physics of God, which is how science and spirituality come together. It's a brilliant book. It's published by an outside publisher. He has a second book that's about to be published, and a third is also in the works, all in this reconciliation of science and spirituality. He's also written 3 novels. Next picture. This is Ramurti and Sita. Anybody who's seen Ramurti now, everything that is dark-haired in that is white, and there's more of it, all of it, and it's all white, and so is she, but this was an earlier iteration of Ramurti and Sita. Next picture. Sahaja, just somewhere cooking. Next picture. This is Rick Morehouse. We saw him earlier in his blacksmith shop. We also saw him in the 4th of July parades dressed in his military uniform, being the water czar. This is a less formal picture. Next. Gyandev. Gyandev is the head of the yoga teacher training. He developed the whole yoga teacher training at Ananda, for Ananda worldwide. And I don't know the timing exactly. It was around this time. He rightly perceived that there was going to be a lot of formalization of what qualified you as a yoga teacher. And he's a founding member of the Yoga Alliance. He made the decision that if all the yoga practitioners in the US were going to get together and set standards and make rules, he thought it best to be in on the ground floor in that so we could influence it as much as possible. So he became a founding member of the Yoga Alliance. He may well have been the president of it for a while and helped formulate all of the standards that are now in existence for yoga teacher training throughout the country. And also, of course, developed the same within our community. Next picture. Nishala and Nakula, Nishala and her husband. Next. Seva, who passed away within the last year. She passed away at the age of 86. Just her heart stopped and she was gone. Just like that. It was perfect passing. Next picture. Karen and David Gamo, a long time ago, at Peter and Mandala Skillman's house, actually, for their housewarming. This is their house at the village, the Skillman house at the village. Next picture. Durga and Vidura, very photogenic couple, always have been. Next picture. Devi in some event or another. Next. This is Irene Schulman. She's been a cornerstone of the Ananda schools at Ananda Village since the very beginning. That hair is also all white now. She has this beautiful long braid white braid goes down her back. Very striking. Lifetime of service to the children. Next picture. This is Shanti Dev. This is a picture taken in Italy. Shanti Dev is a German who came at the age of 18, as I understand it, to live in Ananda Assisi and has been a core member a founding member and a core member of that community all these years. He's a terrifically good artist and has developed he created this whole art form, making these illuminated yantras big, that are like light fixtures that are wall hangings. The spiritual eye in the Ananda Palo Alto temple, which is 4 feet across, is his design. And in later pictures, you'll see it. He was the one who created that for us. Next picture. Arjuna, who's also a founding member of Ananda Assisi, who was a licensed contractor when he arrived first in Ananda village, and he built the temple in Assisi, and he built Swamiji's house, and he did a lot of construction also. He built the expanding light, I believe, also. So he's been very, very instrumental in creating the physical form of Ananda. Next picture. Durga and Vidura and Devaki. In some context, I don't know, but a lovely picture of all 3 of them. Next picture. This is Julia Beinhorn at Ananda Village in front of our lavender bushes in May. The lavender blossoming in that community in the spring was always a great holiday. Next picture. Jaya and Devi. Beautiful. Next. Diana and Yashoda. Next. Up in Seattle, Padma was leading the Seattle Center at that point. Actually, this picture then is from later because she wasn't there in 1994, so this is out of time, but it's close enough. Devarshi and Maria and Padma and Devi, they're on a ferry boat somewhere in Seattle, probably just on a lark together. Next picture. This is Maggie, our costumer extraordinaire in the orange and purple for Halloween, presumably, or maybe it's Thanksgiving, I'm not sure which. Maggie is a true fabric artist, and she just herself not only collected, but also made extraordinary costumes, continues to do so. It's what she does just for fun. It's amazing how having such a rich store of costumes has lent so much color and fun to so many things that we do. You would think it would be incidental, but the wonderful thing about Ananda is that it's just so balanced and natural. And Maggie's costumes for decades, have played a role in just making community life rich and happy. Next picture. This is again Rick. Oh, this is the picture of him really in his blacksmith shop. You can really see what he's able to do. Some of the samples are up on the wall there and all his tools. It's very colorful. Next picture, Durga and Diana, Christmas time. Next, Gloria Dunnigan and some party at Crystal Hermitage that she was helping to host. Gloria is the mother of Narani Morehouse, Rick Morehouse's wife. And so it's been 3 generations there, counting the grandchild. Next picture, Vasanta and Maggie out in the wilderness where they like to be sometimes. Next, here we are, Narani and Rick, and Gloria and the white-haired woman, the picture before is Narani's mother. So they have had the joy, which not all of us have, of having not only spiritual brothers and sisters, but actually something as close as the mother-daughter tie is also Guru Bhais. Next picture. Durga and Asha in our community. Obviously, something funny happened. Next picture. Durga and Asha in Italy. We would lead the pilgrimage tours together, and then usually go to Italy to see Swamiji afterwards, and sometimes travel together. 20 years of that, it was wonderful. Next picture. And Kirtani and Asha, looking strangely alike, although we don't actually look alike. We were somewhere, I'm not sure where, but somewhere in Italy. Next picture. Swamiji, I think, and I'm not sure where he was, but you can tell by the ceiling, he was in some other venue, some hotel, giving a program, likely. And visiting our community. out in the parking lot. We would say hello and goodbye to him. This is lawsuit years because Nidruva is there. It was undoubtedly because of that. Keshava in the green shirt was the paralegal who lived in our community for the duration of that project. Next picture. Swamiji in our church, standing in front of the altar, giving service. Next picture. Speaking again in front of our altar there. Next. Greeting the congregation in the courtyard afterwards. I'm not sure this is 94, but it was close. There's the archery wall that you can see behind, where we would defend against all intruders. I mean, we were just being silly, but we enjoyed it. So we always called it the archery wall. People would hear us to speak of the archery wall, and they wonder, what the heck are you talking about? But that's what it came to be called. Next. And greeting people after service. I would stand next to him so that I could introduce him to people or remind Swami, if he'd already met them before, of what their names are. Next picture. Again, Swami just sitting there. What happened after this is, this was before cell phones, but people came and sat next to Swamiji, and a whole lot of people got to have a picture taken with him on this occasion. Next picture. Us in our temple, for some context, I have no idea. I'm dressed for Sunday service too, so that was the occasion. Next picture. Just a portrait of Swamiji. I think we had a professional photographer who came and took some pictures of him. This was part of that set. Next. This was actually New York City at some bookstore, Swami giving a talk. It might not have been exactly 94, but it was around that time. Next. And this is how Swami often looked in Italy, but I'm not really sure. That might be here. I'm not certain. Next. Spiritual Renewal Week, just sitting at the table for the Indian banquet. And then the last picture we have, the next one, is what I call the chapter picture for 1994. That picture was actually taken by David Praver. We were all together in Carmel, and we were in some beautiful area. During those years, Swami often carried a camera and took lots of pictures. After he said 15,000 beautiful photographs, that was enough, and he stopped. So the cameraman is being photographed by another cameraman in this. So this is the last picture for this year. And the piece I want to play now is Life Mantra. Life Mantra is over 10 minutes, so settle yourself in. Swamiji heard this piece. He first called it Chant of the Angels, because what he heard was an angelic choir singing this song. He said he had no idea what the notes were, anything. He said he had to find the notes, he'd hear it and then he'd find the chords on the keyboard, and then he would write down what he was listening to. It's a very unusual piece, and has a very deep vibration. And once again, it was no accident that this piece and the Life as a Quest for Joy and Secrets of Life also, which was the third orchestral piece he wrote this year, that it all came out of this. His heart surgery, the persecution by his Guru Bhais, the challenge that all of us had to face to suddenly, instead of being praised, we were being vilified. It was a very intense period. And the power of this music, I am sure, helped get us through it. So now let's listen to Chant of the Angels, which later became called Life Mantra.